Hello, welcome to another moment on Indigenous Hands, the Indigenous Voices, that is brought to you by Save the Deaf and Endangered Languages Initiative. It is my pleasure once again to present another wonderful episode to you in this channel. And I know that you know that this is a place where we dissect the matters concerning the indigenous sign languages of African community. So today I'm going to be looking at another topic that was presented in the just concluded IHAVAIC 21. So it's going to be another moment that we are going to enjoy some of those issues that we cherish about indigenous sign languages of Africa. So I want you to sit tight. Today I'm going to be speaking from the topic of one of our keynote speakers, Professor Imelda Udoh. And her topic in the conference was language rights and African indigenous spoken languages. That is the topic I'm going to be speaking on today, language rights and African indigenous spoken languages. But I'm going to be deriving my topic from this topic, and I'm going to be recasting the topic to read language rights and African indigenous signed languages. Language rights and African indigenous signed languages. Sit tight with me. Before I go into the topic today, I want to let you know that we just concluded the first round of our quiz episode that goes on our Facebook page, Advocates for the Indigenous African Sign Languages. And I wanted to congratulate the winner of this first episode, Nakasela Nachalwa, who took the first position in the first quiz episode. And I want to encourage you all to participate in that quiz episode. If you have not, follow the guides that the leader of that episode is giving, and you will not regret it. Rather, you're going to enjoy it. So if you are not on our Facebook page, join the group Advocates for the Indigenous African Sign Languages. Okay, back to our topic for today. Language rights and African indigenous sign languages. And I am going to be drawing this discussion today to also ask the question that our lead paper presenter, Dr. Chika Esiobo, asked in her presentation: do indigenous African sign languages matter? That is kind of, where I'm going to be dwelling my discussion today. Just today, two of my very good friends shared this content with me from WFD, the World Federation of the Deaf, the legal recognition of national sign languages. One of them said, "Where is Niger?" That was a question she asked when she shared the document. She said, national sign languages of different countries. Where is Niger? The other one said, "Oh, I didn't know that many African countries do not have national sign language. Are you aware of this?" I said, "Yes, of course." And I looked at the content. They are the same content. And I laughed within me. And that is the question that we should ask all the time. If you look at this document, you find out that WFD recorded and documented countries that have recognize their national sign languages, and it is in their constitution. On this list, I could count about 3 African countries: Zimbabwe, Uganda, and Kenya. I'm not sure there's any other African country that is here, unless I am wrong. The rest of the countries are non-African countries. So you can imagine why my friend was surprised, and you can imagine the questions that I received, but I laughed receiving the questions. All right, Professor Udoh, in our discussion at the just concluded Conference of Indigenous Hands and Voices of African Identity, touches on some of the international laws that were created to protect the language rights of linguistic communities. And these include the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, United Nations Declaration of the Rights of the Indigenous People, the African Charter on Human People's Rights. And I would like to cite the African Cultural Charter on Africa, which says, the African states recognize the imperative need to develop African languages, which will ensure their cultural advancement and accelerate their economic and social development. And to this end, will endeavor to formulate a national policy in regard to languages. Remember, Professor Udoh is talking about the spoken languages, indigenous spoken languages of African linguistic communities. And today, I am using this topic to go down to the most vulnerable linguistic communities, which are our deaf communities in Africa. Professor Udoh notes that although provisions are made for the rights of the indigenous African languages, the socio-political complexities and other factors involved seem to erode these rights and render ineffective the efforts put in place for the development of African languages. It goes down to the question again: do indigenous African sign languages matter? Professor Udoh is decrying, lamenting the deplorable and endangered position many of our African languages are. The endangerment that is facing many of our African spoken languages. You can imagine how much more the endangerment that is facing our indigenous sign languages. And you can also imagine why we have taken this as a point of responsibility to discuss indigenous African sign languages, where the WFD is helping countries to recognize their national sign languages. At the same time, our own countries don't even have national sign languages to recognize. The challenge facing the rights of an African deaf child is such that we do not exhaust in the discussions that we have. What are the complexities that seem to erode the rights of African linguistic communities? What are those complexities, socio-political complexities and other complexities that seem to affect the right of a child born in Africa? Professor Udoh takes her discussion to this extent by saying some of this, and I quote, he says, and I'm using Nigeria now, I'm coming down to Nigeria to buttress this point, and I'm using it as a case study. He said Nigeria has no language policy. Of course, there's none that is obviously recognized. But in the education policy of Nigeria, it says that a child is supposed to be taught in the immediate language, in the language of immediate environment, up to the elementary 3. This is a proposal made by the federal government, which of course was not implemented for obvious reasons that we know. And that English is supposed to be taught much later, since English still occupies the official status in our countries. And for other African countries, we have Arabic and French also competing with English and the indigenous languages. Now, bringing this into the deaf communities, where we have indigenous sign languages that are not even recognized, that are hardly recognized by the deaf persons themselves because of the sign language that is in deaf education, which is more or less a foreign sign language, or which we have like called foreign-based sign language. So the rights of a deaf child that is born in our rural communities seems to have been eroded, the linguistic rights. But from the discussion that we had on this topic in the conference that we just concluded, she went ahead to buttress that these rights are part of human rights and should not be touched. Because it goes to the extent that there are mechanisms set up to protect these rights, but the forces that are working against the right, the linguistic right of the minority groups, where the deaf linguistic communities belong, they seem to overwhelm the international protection set up. But it doesn't just end there. It becomes so disheartening that, and ironical also, that even the international bodies that set up the mechanisms to protect these rights that are proclaimed seem to be agents, seem to be role players in perpetrating the marginalization of these rights. When it comes to our indigenous sign languages, you seem to wonder who is really a player in favor of the development and recognizing of these sign languages. I want to take it, a little bit down to earth, and I want to discuss something that has been part of what is in our narrative all the while that we've been having discussions on this channel. The international forces that seem to recognize the foreign and foreign-based sign languages that are used in several African linguistic communities, and that seem to realize these and rather describe this as dialects of foreign sign languages. Using Nigeria as a case study, anytime anybody describes the sign language variety that is used in Nigeria as dialect of American Sign Language, is marginalizing, undermining the linguistic rights of deaf children born in that country. Anytime anybody boldly describes that Nigeria uses a sign language that is a dialect of American Sign Language, that is a very serious undermining of the rights, the linguistic rights of deaf people born in that country and in those communities. And why are we saying this? Go back to historical lane. Nigerian sign languages, indigenous Nigerian sign languages, were among the older sign languages recorded as having been in existence. And not just only in existence, also some of them have been described as well developed in the pre-colonial times. What happened that the developed and the well-developed signing systems are something we cannot even reckon with right now, if not colonialism and the neo-colonial mentality that came after that. Professor Udoh lamented on the impact of colonialism on our indigenous languages. Of course, that is obvious. But we have, like so many people will say, we have gone past the colonial time, right? Yes. But why are we still dwelling here, where we seem not to recognize the rights of our indigenous languages? Talking of the conference keynote address spoken, talking of this moment, the sign languages. That is the issue we are trying to review again today. Not that it is a new thing to this discussion, because in 2018 we wrote a paper that we presented in the University of London about this topic, the linguistic right of an African child, the linguistic right of the African deaf children. What is it? We seem to ask that question. What is the linguistic right of the deaf children in Africa? And we have always want to look at this from the things that we have seen happening in the deaf communities in Nigeria, which of course, having been, doing this study for a period of time, we have observed that these things also happen in the deaf communities that are in some other African countries that we see. The question now comes back to us. How can these African countries have their national sign languages on this map? And then it comes back to the question I will boldly ask. What is the WFD doing in helping these nationalities, African nationalities, to elevate the status of their sign languages to national sign language? I think I need to get someone answer this question. What is the WFD doing to ensure that African deaf communities recognize their indigenous sign languages, elevate them to the national status, help them lobby the government, if there's anything like that, to recognize these sign languages? If you come to the recognition of sign languages, there has to be an entity that is a representative of the people's cultural and linguistic identity. That is where the confusion is. If the sign language used in my country is often regarded and described as dialect of a sign language of another country, how can it become a national sign language? It cannot. And having understood by virtue of learning that a people's language represents the socioeconomic status of the people, that is to say that a people cannot grow beyond the status of their language. I come to believe that the status of our sign languages have everything to do with the status of our deaf communities. And if this is accurate, I think it becomes very imperative, just like the discussion Dr. Udoh had with us in the conference, that it becomes imperative. In fact, she was quoting from the international body, the United Nations, that the charter, that Africa should recognize that it has become an imperative need that African communities should develop their indigenous languages. On the other hand, the challenge is not for the foreign countries to come and develop our indigenous sign languages for us. The challenge is for us. It is a responsibility that we cannot shirk, we cannot avoid, we cannot shift to another. And that is why we continue to come here to address this point from different angles, the sign languages of African deaf communities. When are they going to rise? What is the right of a deaf child born in my community, born deaf? What is the linguistic right? When is that right going to be gained, or at least regained? And we're asking this question today to say, go home with it and ask it to any deaf person that you have in your community. And if you are a deaf person, ask it yourself, what is the linguistic right of my community, and what is my linguistic right? Is it dependent upon what could be described or what has been described as a dialect of another sign language? How proud are you to use a borrowed language to be yours? This is the Indigenous Hands, the Indigenous Voices. The only place you can hear about these issues, about Indigenous African sign languages. Have this discussion here, and we are going to have a change. We believe that. And I know you are going to continuously be impacted by the discussions that we're having here. Please share our videos and subscribe to our channel. And I'm going to see you next week. Bye.